I was hit by my boyfriend's sister riding an electric car, and went to the same hospital for an emergency. I had a broken humerus and she had minor abrasions. Through the curtain, her voice was delicate and pitiful. Senior brother, I was in a car accident and was in the hospital, alone. Between me and her, he chose to take care of her. During the days of my injury, I was alone and learned to cook with one hand, wash dishes with one hand, tie braids with one hand, and take care of myself with one hand. Later, I left a man's, became him. After filming in the emergency room, the doctor told me that it was a fracture of the right humerus. Fortunately, it is not too serious, but it needs to be fixed for a month before rehabilitation. As soon as I walked to the door of the treatment room with the film in hand, I heard a delicate voice with a crying voice coming from inside. I don't know what's going on. The woman suddenly appeared. I didn't have time to break, so whimpering cries came through the curtain, and I sat on the edge of the treatment bed, quietly waiting for the emergency department nurse to disinfect and bandage the wound in my joint. It's okay, a warm male voice came through the curtain. People nowadays, they don't look at the road when they walk. Don't blame you. Isn't she fine? And she's not dead. Don't be afraid. If she scolds you, senior brother will help you out. It's a voice I can't know more well. My boyfriend, Alan Joan, the person in his mouth, who walks without looking at the road, and is not dead, and wants to slander people, is me. It was his little sister Amelia, who hit me on an electric car, and the reason why I came to him was to surprise him on our 7th anniversary. I knew about Amelia last month. Alan Joan's school and I are an hour and a half away by car, and we can only see each other almost once a week. Because he has a small house near the school, I basically come to his side. It was 11 p.m., and he went downstairs to buy me a drink at the convenience store, and took my phone by mistake. We have the same phone model, the same lock screen and payment password, and it's our anniversary together XX0702, so even if I get it wrong, he can pay, and I'm not worried. I was watching TV on the couch when his phone suddenly lit up. I grabbed my phone and a line flashed on the screen. Cute guagua, did you sleep he? I looked at the line and fell into deep thought. I entered the password and wanted to open the phone, but I entered it twice, but it was prompted that the password was incorrect. Oh, it turns out that he changed the password. When he came back, I held up my phone to show him. He was stunned for a moment. Oh, that. People say it's better not to have an anniversary. This kind of day is better. It's easy to be risky. This is a junior sister of mine. He turned off his phone, and took me into his arms. I guess they asked me about my thesis again. In fact, from his concealed nervous appearance that night, I had already guessed a thing or two. I just don't want to admit that my boyfriend, who has been with me for 7 years, is now interested in someone else, is even more unwilling. Alan Joan and I were together in high school, at the beginning of the summer vacation of the sophomore year of high school, because the atmosphere of welcoming the 3rd year of high school was too tense. The boys in the class who were just starting to love made a lot drawing game, and more than a dozen boys. Which girl's name was caught, they had to write love letters to which girl. The next day, no one else wrote, only he stupidly brought a love letter. It also became the only letter from the whole class to circulate and observe, which almost alarmed the teacher, and the heroine of that letter is me. After class, he kicked me out of the classroom in a nervous way, apologized embarrassedly, then looked me in the eye and said, "Actually, it's not a joke." I looked at him dumbfounded. "Joe Wallace, is it really like you? Can you?" That. He took a deep breath. "Be my girlfriend." I was stunned for a long time, until the class bell rang. Then I lowered my head, and whispered, "Okay." After receiving the reply, Alan Joan's nervous face bloomed with a smile, and he suddenly stepped forward before the teacher came, hugged me gently, and whispered in my ear, "More advice after that, girlfriend." That love letter that was supposed to be a joke, I kept it. I also always thought that my relationship with Alan Joan was very good, and the 7-year itch did not exist. Although our universities are in different cities, our graduate students are guaranteed to go to 2 schools in the same city together. Alan Joan could have been admitted to this school, but when he heard that I was going to this city for graduate school, he resolutely gave up his place at this school, and came to a school here. because he said he didn't want to be away from me anymore. Alan Joanne's family is better than mine, and when his second year of graduate school started, his parents helped him buy a small house in the city, saying that it would be used as our wedding room. But just when I thought that everything was going according to plan, and I would put on a wedding dress and marry him after graduation, everything I did seemed to have secretly deviated from the original track. Alan Joanne's mentor, for example, always had to work overtime on weekends to do experiments. For example, he used to say that he couldn't sleep well if he didn't hold me, but now he sleeps with his back to me. For example, he took the initiative to call me less and less. For example, for the first time, he forgot our anniversary. I didn't even know that he had forgotten his anniversary, because he had changed his phone password, or because I forgot the anniversary. I changed my phone password. When the nurse came to treat my wounds, I gritted my teeth and didn't say a word. "You're pretty strong," the nurse said as she rubbed my medicine. "The one over there, just a little bruised, crying like something. My boyfriend has been coaxing there for a long time." I smiled at her. She didn't know that it was my boyfriend over there. After tetanus, I walked to the hospital door, took out my phone, and sent a message to Alan Joan. "I'm going to come over today. Where are you?" A few seconds later, Alan Joan was back. "I'm sorry, Joe Wallace. The lab has been too busy this week." "I'm still in the lab. Or you don't come here this week." I stared at this sentence and actually laughed. "The wind blows and my eyes hurt," I replied. "Okay." I didn't actually go back. I went to Alan Joanne's house, and put the 7th anniversary gift I had prepared in the closet. It was a commemorative album of photos, envelopes and ticket stubs that I had saved during our 7-year relationship. When I was away from college with him, I missed him a lot, and every time I separated, I always cried. When he saw me crying, his eyes were always red. The two are always inseparable at the train station. I don't know how many times they missed the train, and they held hands to make up the ticket. At that time, he told me that he would write to me every week. Later, he literally wrote for 4 whole years. I treasured the letters, and later scanned them one by one and kept them in electronic format. I closed the door to Alan Joanne's house, and looked at Amelia's moments on my phone. Yes, because she was fully responsible for running a red light in this accident. She and I added Weshit and need to bear my medical expenses. On Weshit, 5 minutes ago, she just posted a circle of friends. Woo, the passing year is not good, but fortunately, there is a senior brother here. Underneath, Alan Joanne's praise is particularly glaring. Suddenly, I was a little unwilling, took out his mobile phone and sent a Weshit message to Alan Joan. "I'm broken." Alan Joanne's call came right away. "What's wrong, Joe Wallace? Why did you break your bones all of a sudden?" "I wanted to come to you, and then I was hit by an electric car, and the doctor said I couldn't move for a month. Can I come to live with you, Joe Wallace?" He burst out laughing. On the other end of the line, "You lied to me, didn't you?" I was stunned. "I know you miss me, but I've been too busy with experiments lately to really leave." He paused. "I'll go with you when I'm done with this while." "Okay, Alan Joan." "I'm sorry, Joe Wallace. The mentor called me. I'll call you later." After saying that, he hung up. If I hadn't heard him whisper softly to Amelia in the hospital, I might have believed that he was too busy experimenting to get out. I stood silently in the doorway of Alan Joanne's house, alone, with a sling on my right arm, and my boyfriend, who was accompanied by a little junior sister who was just bruised, concluded that I was lying to him without even asking too much for verification. It turns out that there is no need to compare at all. There is no need to fight, and the person who loses before the start is me. A little later, Amelia updated another photo. "Thank you, senior brother, for always being with me. Woo woo woo. As long as senior brother is here, I'm not afraid of anything." When I saw this photo, I suddenly had an epiphany. My love for Alan Joan, after 7 years, is as strong as it has always been, and even stronger, and he may have been tired of it. I left and went back to my old house. This is the only thing my grandfather left me. The house in the city has long been sold by my aunt, and several adults have divided the money, and this house that no one wants has become my only place to live. It's not that I can't live in the dormitory, but I can't move one arm, and it's still hard to get up. It was already summer vacation, and at the beginning of this year, Alan Joan and I had planned the big things for the year together, and he urged me to move in with him for the summer. Grandpa has died. What are you doing back to that house? He stroked my hair gently. Joe Wallace, now that I've bought a house, you've got a home, and this is your home. He also once hugged my grandfather when he died, and I cried non-stop and said, Joe Wallace, you and me, I will accompany you every year during the Chinese New Year, and I am your family. Now, I've moved in as promised, but he's forgotten. I just learned that it is so easy to forget. I couldn't move at all where my right arm was broken. The old house didn't have air conditioning. I had prickly heat on my arm, and I couldn't sleep all night. After all, my left hand is not very flexible, and I can't even tie myself in a braid. Amelia transferred the cost of the treatment to me, and she still posts it on Moments every day. Senior brother said that you have to eat more pigs, trotters so that your skin can recover quickly. Woo woo, I'm so moved. My senior brother specially bought a scar removal artifact for me. I'm not afraid of scars now. Senior brother took me out to play, although I was still afraid that the sun would be dull. But the senior brother said that if you bask in the sun more, you can get good luck, and bad luck will recede. When I was struggling to bathe, cook, dress, and take care of myself alone, through the circle of friends, I saw that my boyfriend was caring for another person in every way. Maybe to prove that he was really busy, he didn't even send me a wish it message. Later, I saw a letter in Amelia's circle of friends. It was a handwritten letter. Senior brother said that he had written letters to his girlfriend before, and under my stalking, he finally agreed to write to me. This year, who has ever received a handwritten letter? If you don't accept it, you will fight. The accompanying photo is a full-page letter. The handwriting of this letter is very familiar to me, and I have cherished it very much. I thought it was a romance and a secret just for me and Alan Joan. Unexpectedly, even this, he gave it to her. I looked at the screen in a daze, the corners of my eyes sour, and after so many days, I finally burst into tears that I couldn't stop. I blocked Alan Joan, and I no longer looked at Amelia's circle of friends, but just asked her on Weshit how to calculate the compensation except for medical expenses. I knew she would think I was cheating on her, and go to Alan Joan for help. It didn't take long for her to send a Weshit message. You're Joe Wallace. Immediately after that, there is a video application. So, I blocked her too. I didn't really want any compensation. It's just that this ridiculous and bloody thing must come to an end. After another week at home, I received a call from my high school classmates. Oh my God, where did you go? Alan Joan's crazy looking for you, she asked on the other end of the phone. He said you were hurt. The world is looking for you. Where the hell are you? I was silent on the other end of the line. When was the last time Alan Joan came looking for me all over the world? Oh, the time we went to the beach together, when we were sophomores. We had a fight over a trivial matter, and I was so angry that I only went out with my phone. We were in an undeveloped seaside town, and as I walked, I suddenly realized that I seemed to be lost. Coincidentally, the phone ran out of battery. The sky was getting darker and darker, and I was walking alone on the road where I didn't know where it was, and there was no one around. At this moment, a large group of people came over on the next road. It turned out to be a local person, holding a festival. I was a timid man, and I stood there with my legs shaking, but I saw him through the crowd. He was also in the crowd, his face full of anxiety, and the sweat on his forehead was especially noticeable in the light and fear light. I'll never forget that moment. We looked at each other in the crowd, and there were so many people, so dazzling fire, but I could only see him. He rushed up to me against the flow of people. His eyes were red, and he hugged me tightly. At that moment, his body was shaking. I'm scared to death. He stroked my hair over and over again. Joe Wallace, I can't find you. I'm really scared to death. On the way back to the hotel, he told me as he walked that he really realized what it meant to suddenly look back. But the person was in the dim light. He also asked me to promise that no matter how angry I was in the future, I couldn't play missing, and I couldn't let him find it. I'm not going to run around anymore, and even if we get separated in the future, I'll be waiting for you where I am. I lay on his back, my voice buzzing. A word is a certainty. He put me down, and under the moonlight, he boyishly tried to hook me. Since then, I've literally stayed where I am and never run around again. And the one who went away first became him. I didn't tell my classmates where I was. I just said I was fine so they didn't have to worry. But 3 days later, I met Alan Joan. At the door of the house, my aunt was standing beside him, looking a little uncomfortable when she saw me. "You're so old. What's the quarrel you can't talk about? Alan Joan came to me when he was looking for you, but luckily I remember how to get to this house. Or if you were hiding in this backcountry, how do you think he would find it?" I didn't say anything. She probably didn't find it interesting, and left after not staying long. It was just me and Alan Joan, standing silently in the doorway. Joe Wallace hadn't seen him for 2 weeks. He seemed to be much more decadent. The light in his eyes was gone, and even the stubble on his chin had not been shaved clean. He stepped forward and hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry, Joe Wallace." His voice trembled slightly. "Come home with me." "Okay, Alan Joan." I paused, opening my mouth softly. "Are you here to negotiate compensation with me, on Amelia's behalf?" He froze. "I can't move my right arm, and I can't go to the internship. You know, this internship is quite important. This internship opportunity is something I have worked hard for, starting in August. And if I perform well, there is a high probability that I can stay and work in that well-known local group after graduation. But now, I had to give up that opportunity." "You say, how much do you think your junior sister should pay me?" I whispered. "Shouldn't there always be a lost time pay? This shouldn't be a liability to her." "Of course, if you think I'm slandering, stand up for her, Joe Wallace." He hugged me tightly, his voice revealing palpable pain. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I really don't know." He said he really didn't know. However, I had called him twice. The first time I was hit was when the traffic police came to determine the responsibility. I encountered this kind of thing for the first time, and I was injured again, and I was very scared. I tried to call him for help, but he never answered. The second time, I told him about my broken bones, but he said I was lying to him. "Joe Wallace, come home with me." "Okay, I've already postponed the summer internship, and I've taken a leave of absence from the teacher's side. Let me take good care of you." "Okay." His voice was shaking. I gently pushed him away, speaking in a tone as calm as a lake. "Alan Joan, you know what? I thought there were a lot of things I couldn't do. For example, after an accident, I went to the doctor by myself, took films, applied suspenders, gave injections, treated wounds, and only moved my left hand. How to dress, eat, and even tie my hair." "Joe Wallace." He looked at me, with a pained look on his face, as the corners of his eyes turned red. "But I was wrong. You see, it's not a big deal." I paused. At that time, I thought that for these 3 months, I would definitely not be able to live without you. I smiled and pointed to the hairpin on my head. "But in just 2 weeks, I can do so much with one hand. You see, even the hairpin grabbing, I've figured out a solution." "Joe Wallace." He stepped forward. I shook my head and took a step back. "Alan Joan, I don't need you anymore." I whispered. "Let's break up." He looked at me in a daze. "No, I'll never break up with you." He took my hand. A thin layer of sweat broke out from his palms, but his tone was unusually firm. "Joe Wallace, let's go home. You give me a chance to explain." "Okay, me and her are really not what you think. She is just a junior sister, my girlfriend. It's you. Go home." I repeated softly. "Yes, go home." I slowly took out my phone from my pocket with my left hand, and pulled out a screenshot of Amelia's moments a while ago. "Is this the home you are talking about?" In the screenshot, Amelia took a selfie at Alan Joan's house. "Come to my brother's house to play." "Anyway, my brother's house is so clean." Alan Joan looked at the screenshot stunned. No, it's not what you think. She wants to borrow a book from me, and I just passed by the house after dinner, so I took her up to get it, and she stayed for 5 minutes." "Joe Wallace." His tone was almost pleading. "I really don't have anything with her. Can you believe me?" He said. "Just 5 minutes." "Alan Joan, do you know what I was doing in those 5 minutes?" "When I was taking a shower, my feet slipped and I hit the concrete floor, all of a sudden." "And you were with her, admiring the house?" And in the 5 minutes I was posting on Moments, I was using iodine to carefully treat my new wounds. I thought that after 2 weeks, I would be able to let go. But at this moment, tears still flowed uncontrollably. I realized that the pain and sadness had never left. Joe Wallace. Alan Joan hugged me and scrambled to wipe my tears. I'm damned. It's all my fault. Don't cry. Joe Wallace. Okay, you give me a chance to make up for it. Let's go home. Okay, I'm not going anywhere. No one is paying attention. And I'm not going to let anyone come to the house. Okay, I shook my head. Alan Joan. That's not my house. It's your house. I gently pushed him away. You go. I'm going home. I'll go to you in 100 days. When I'm well, I'll go get something from you. Alan Jones still didn't leave. He didn't agree to break up, but stayed in the old house, taking care of my 3 meals a day and all the housework. When I wake up every day, I have a glass of warm water on the table, and in the bathroom, the brushing water is ready, and the toothpaste is squeezed. He was originally a person who didn't touch the spring water with his fingers, and when they used to be together, they all cooked for me. Now I can make a pot of bone broth by looking at the recipe. I told him not to do it anymore, but his tone was almost pleading. Joe Wallace, I know you hate me in your heart, even hate me, but until you are healed, let me take care of you and don't drive me away. Okay, I looked at him and suddenly there was a hint of a trance. If it had been before, I would have felt that it was a sign that he loved me, but now, I'm a little unsure. Is he doing this because of love? Because of guilt? Or because he wants the little sister he is protecting? Don't feel guilty. Is he really there to take care of me? Or are you afraid that I'm going to get into trouble with that girl? Or are you afraid that I will make a big fuss and embarrass her at school? Something suddenly occurred to me. If Amelia hadn't bumped into me that day, I would never have known how gentle he took care of her. And in the 4 years we were away from the place, whether he would have had such a little sister, but I never know. Thinking of this, I suddenly realized one thing. That is, no matter how good Alan Joan is to me, we can't go back, because my once unreserved trust in him has gradually been covered with uncontrollable suspicions, and will never return. At night, I sat on the steps of the old house, and looked at the plane trees in the courtyard in a daze. In the past, our high school also had such a plane tree. It was after the end of the 3rd year of high school, and I didn't perform very well, so the homeroom teacher called me to the office, and asked me if I was delaying my homework because of a relationship. When I came out of the teacher's office, my eyes were red, and during the evening self-study, Alan Joan took me under the plane tree without saying a word. Under the tree, I looked up at him, not understanding what he was going to do, until he suddenly lowered his head and kissed me gently. It was the first time the two of us kissed, and it was each other's first kiss. My eyes widened, and I almost held my breath in fright, but for a moment, he straightened up, and seemed a little embarrassed. I've heard that the legend of this school is that kissing under this sycamore tree can pass on your good luck to each other. Really, I don't believe it. Of course. He rubbed my head, closed his eyes and made a wish. The phoenix perched on the plane tree. I would like to give all my good luck to Joe Wallace, and the next exam will be a success. I was amused by his serious look and asked him, but your good fortune has been given to me. What are you going to do? That night, the street lamp next to the tree was broken, and the surroundings were quiet, and the whole world seemed to be only the moon, the sycamore, and us. He said, "Fool, my good fortune is you." Later, maybe it was really the plane tree apparition that night. We both did well in the college entrance examination, went to the school of our choice, and became a model couple in the eyes of our classmates. A few years have passed, and several couples in the same class in high school have divided into several couples, and fewer people have come to the class reunion during the winter and summer vacations. During the winter vacation of my senior year, he and I attended a class reunion, and the sky was snowing, and the two of us went back to school hand in hand, and walked under the plane tree, talking about the couples who broke up. I couldn't help but sigh. If the two of us hadn't come together in the future, I don't think I would have come to the class reunion. As a result, before he finished speaking, he pinched his mouth. I protested, woo woo woo, but he hugged me from behind. Don't talk nonsense. How could we not have come together? His body was warm, and he put his hand on the tip of my nose. I will only get married once in my life, and I will only have one wife, which is Joe Wallace. Later, I thought that maybe it was the plane tree, but after all, I thought we were too greedy, so the second time I made a wish, it didn't work. Addresses in the countryside. Many couriers are reluctant to deliver, and Alan Jones seems to have added money to allow some couriers to deliver to their homes. On this day, he was washing the dishes, and I went to open the door, and it was a courier. It was a cash on delivery, and I was just about to go back to the house to get my phone, and Alan Jones came over, because his hands were wet, and asked me to help me get my phone out of my pocket. But when I got it, I was stunned. I don't know the password of his phone. He seemed to realize this immediately, hesitated, and whispered to me, 0523, 0523. I'm not a sensitive person to numbers, but in an instant, I thought about what this set of numbers meant. It's Amelia's birthday. The traffic accident certificates issued by the traffic police at that time for the two of us had two people's ID numbers. I looked at him in disbelief, still unable to believe that he had actually replaced our anniversary with the girl's birthday. And when he saw my expression, he instantly understood what I knew. He hurriedly wiped his hands clean and opened the express. Inside are the calcium tablets he bought for me, bird's nest, and scar removal gel. These days, he does take good care of me, but when I see the all-English gel, I can't help but think of Amelia's circle of friends. Joe Wallace. He looked at me, his tone anxious. This thing is not what you think. It's because of a bet. The rules stipulate that the loser has to use the birthday of the winning person as the lock screen password for 3 months. I didn't want to hear it anymore, so I picked up the gel and interrupted him coldly. I heard that this gel is very useful. He was stunned. Yes. Before he could finish his sentence, I threw the gel to the ground. So, you bought it for me, because she used it so well. He looked at me in a daze. I turned. I don't need what she uses. Joe Wallace. Alan Jones was silent, lowering his head to pick up the gel, his tone almost pleading. Don't do that, okay? Yes, I don't want that either. How did I end up like this? But Alan Jones, because you've changed, so have I. I became mean, bitter, and inwardly resentful, because I am uncomfortable. I want to feel my pain to those who hurt me. I don't think it's fair, so I'm going to keep hurting you to make amends. In this way, one day, we will change from the closest lovers to resentful couples, who hate each other. I'll never forget hearing my boyfriend's soft words of comfort to another girl through the curtain, and I'll never forget the 4 numbers 0523. What about you? How long can you carry the guilt of betrayal? That night, Alan Jones told me all about Amelia. Amelia's stepbrother, he said, was a thug who often came to the school to harass her, and she was scared every day. And because she made a serious mistake in an experimental data, she made several senior sisters in the same sect stay up for a few nights to correct it, causing other people in the same sect to be a little prejudiced against her. She was helpless and had no friends, so she had to turn to him for help. So he would send her back to the dormitory after the teachers' meeting in the evening, and he would also give her guidance in her studies, and help her do those difficult experiments. She would invite him to dinner out of gratitude, and she would also buy him a cup of coffee before each meeting, and the handwritten letter, because she had just been in a car accident and was scolded by her mentor. When he comforted her, she cried that she had never received any encouragement, and cautiously asked him if he could write a letter of encouragement to her. He also said that the letters written to her were not the same as the letters written to me. She knows I have a girlfriend. He hugged me. Joe Wallace, I've changed my phone password. Let's have another anniversary. Okay. I let him hold him and didn't speak. How can it be again? Isn't the reason why Memorial Day is an anniversary day because it is only that day? And it is a special day. I just thought it wasn't easy for her to be alone at first, and I wanted to take care of her. Joe Wallace, and I really never thought about being with her. Yes, his little junior sister is a person, and she only has him as a senior brother to rely on. I don't care if his little sister is playing an ambiguous sidekick intentionally or unintentionally. But what about him? Did he forget that I am also a person, and the only person I can rely on is him? At night, we sat side by side under the plane tree, and I asked him calmly, "You said that you only took care of her, so do you think that your care for her has crossed the line?" He didn't speak. "Are you tired?" I asked him. He looked up and looked at me quizzically. "Take care of two people at the same time," I said, looking at him, my tone still unwavering. "Are you tired?" He may not be tired, or even enjoyed, but I'm so tired. "Joe Wallace, give me another chance." He hugged me tightly. "I've deleted her. I'm not going to contact her again. Give us another chance." "Okay." I finally burst into tears. When I was hit by an electric car that didn't slow down, my whole body was blindfolded, and that was the first time I deeply felt that death is a momentary thing. I looked at him, with tears in my eyes. "At that time, I called your phone with trembling hands. I wanted to be coquettish with you, and I told you how scared I was at that time, how painful my fracture was, and I really wanted you to hug me, and say to me, 'Don't be afraid, there is me.' But why? Why do you have to be in the hospital so I can see you with her?" How reluctant am I to be that I didn't even have the courage to lift the curtain in the hospital, but secretly walked away by myself. "I've given you the opportunity." My tears kept running down my cheeks. "On the phone, I told you clearly." I covered my face and cried. "I told you that." That night, I cried for a long, long time. The strength of the strong support, the grievances swallowed, seemed to be like a flood bursting the embankment, pouring down. I suffer precisely because I like him too much. How many nights have I woken up in pain and couldn't sleep because I turned over, looking at the roof with tears streaming down my face, and the bits and pieces of the past 7 years have occupied my mind, and made me think about him uncontrollably. How many times have I trembled with thoughts and wanted to call him again, but reason forced me to look at Amelia's circle of friends over and over again, sober myself up, and let myself go. I'm really miserable. Young love. 7 years of love. He seems to exist in every memory cell of mine, occupying my entire youth. How can he let go so easily? But he's changed, forced me to have to debone and cut the flesh, endure the pain, and peel him out of my life little by little. At the beginning of August, I removed the sling and checked that the bones had grown. By the end of August, my right arm was able to move easily, and I rejected Alan Joanne's suggestion to go to his home to continue recuperation. I went back to school. Alan Joan silently escorted me downstairs to the dormitory, and he seemed to realize that I was determined to break up with him, this time. There were no classes in my 3rd year of graduate school, so I was preparing for my graduation thesis while looking for a job. The previous group asked me if I would like to do an internship in September, but I thought about it and refused. I submitted my resume to Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou and Shenzhen. Alan Joan is still on my blacklist, but he will come to me often, and even mobilize a lot of people to persuade me, including our high school classmates, my best friend, my roommate, his senior sister, and even his parents. His Ph.D. sister asked me for coffee and told me that Amelia had been transferred to another teacher who had just been transferred. The mentor didn't like her very much. She was slow to work, she loved to make mistakes, and to be honest, we didn't like her either. It just so happened that the teacher had just come, and had no students, so he was transferred, and now the group meeting is not with us. In the cafe, she asked me, "How's it going? Is there a bit of relief?" I shook my head, digging. I don't seem to feel anything. I don't really care what she does. My best friend also came to persuade me. "Are you really going to break up? You know, in society, it's really hard to meet a guy who is better than Alan Joan. Can you guarantee that the next boy you meet will be able to persist for 7 years without changing your mind?" My roommate also asked me, "Do you really not regret it?" Our high school classmate, his good buddy, even called me specifically for an hour. "You know, back then, when everyone was playing that love letter game, Alan Joan started smoking it, and it wasn't you. I was the one who won your name at that time. He wanted to trade with me. I jokingly asked for his basketball with a celebrity signature, and he didn't let people touch that basketball in normal times, but he really gave it to me, just to have a valid reason to approach you. Finally, he said, "Joe Wallace, after all these years, we've all looked at him, and he really cares about you. 7 years of affection should be cherished." if you break up, it's really a pity. Yes, the 7-year relationship is something to be cherished. It is precisely because I want to cherish it that I want to leave him. Because Amelia's matter will always be like a small thorn in the throat, a thin needle hidden in the bottom of the heart. You can't see or touch, but as long as you move lightly, you can feel pain. In the days to come, I will haunt his betrayal, and he will be frustrated with why I will grasp a mistake and never let go. I would be suspicious, always afraid that he would change his mind again, and he would be restrained and guilty. How long can such two people love and how far can they go? At that time, how much of the affection we cherish will be left? In March, I received an offer from a company in Beijing. My graduation thesis had been revised, and the company called and asked me to do an internship for a while before graduation. And out of nowhere, Alan Joan found out about it. That day, it was raining heavily, and when I went down with an umbrella, Alan Joan was already downstairs in the dormitory, drenched in the rain, and waited for me for 3 hours. Joe Wallace. His face couldn't tell if it was tears or rain. You're leaving, aren't you? I moved the umbrella over his head. Alan Joan, don't do this. You'll catch a cold. There was a gleam in his eyes, and he even stammered when he spoke. Joe Wallace, you say what? I looked him in the eye. These eyes, which used to be clear and bright, always showed love when they looked at me, and I really liked them. Alan Joan, let's go to the beach again. An undeveloped seaside town, a few years ago is now an internet celebrity tourist destination. The early spring breeze was still a little cool, and Alan Joan and I walked side by side on the beach in the evening, watching the afterglow of the sunset over the sea. The town has changed, for the better, and has become unrecognizable. And we, too, have changed. He knows, and I know. The two of us, holding hands like this, quietly watched the sun set little by little, waiting for the noisy crowd to slowly disperse. We sat on the beach and talked about the small note he gave me in high school, but was almost intercepted by the teacher. The surprise of him suddenly parachuting into my school when I was in college, and how delicious the bowl of noodles we ate together after he went to school to accompany me to study at night in my first year of graduate school. It's a memory, but it's also a farewell. When the moon rose, I stood up. He also stood up, under the moonlight. His expression was reluctant, remorseful, or sad. I couldn't see clearly, but I know it's time to end it anyway. Joe Wallace. His voice was soft. Soft. Really, can't you? I shook my head. I loved you, and I could even say that I still love you. I want to take good care of this loving memory, so that when I am 70 or 80, when I recall this relationship, I can tell myself that I love passionately, share decently, and I am worthy of myself. Alan Joan. I stepped forward, and for the last time, gently hugged him, saying goodbye to my 7 years of youth. Goodbye. The cool sea breeze ruffled my hair, and we embraced each other quietly. Thank you for these 7 years, he cried, tears dripping down the beach, and I let go of him and turned away. In this seaside town, we used to look at each other, hugged each other, and promised each other that we would never be separated again. But we were eventually separated, and this time, I didn't look back. Extra 1 Alan Joan. Joe Wallace is gone, to Beijing. She barely had any contact with anyone here, and I knew she was hiding from me. I joined a local company and some of my colleagues began to ask if I had a girlfriend, and were eager to introduce me. I rejected them all, more than once. In the middle of the night, I went back to that day. Instead of answering Amelia's call that day, I called Joe Wallace back. On the other end of the line, she sniffled and told me she had been hit by an electric car, and had broken her bones. I rushed to the hospital and as soon as she saw me, her eyes turned red. I hugged her in distress, and she was coquettish in my arms. Alan Joan, I hurt so much. I can't lift my arm. Will I become disabled? I put a kiss on her forehead. It's okay, don't be afraid. My husband is here. It's all right. She nodded. She began to tell me about the accident, saying how to cross the road at a green light in a good way, and was hit by an electric car, and the girl who drove the electric car, because she looked at her mobile phone while driving, did not see the red light, nor did she see her, and did not even slow down in the slightest. The moment I was hit, I was really scared. I thought I was going to die. I hugged her, who was trembling slightly, thinking of how scared she was at the time, and my heart was full of self-blame. Joe Wallace, I'm sorry. I should have seen the phone earlier. The sooner you see it, the sooner you can accompany her, and she won't be so afraid. It's all right, she sniffled. Aren't you here? I knew you were busy, and you'd call me back when you saw it. That's what she is. Sure, me, always accommodating. I accompanied her to do all the examinations carefully, and when she returned home, she opened her suitcase and rummaged through it with one hand. Despite her injuries and her right arm, I asked her what she was doing, and she was mysterious and told me to close my eyes. It is a commemorative book. It turned out that she wanted to surprise me today. The surprise almost turned into a fright. She pouted and whispered, "Does it still hurt?" I looked at her wounds all over her body, and I was still distressed. She nodded, shook her head again, and said with a smile, "It hurts a lot, but you accompany me, and it doesn't seem to hurt so much." I snuggled up with her and flipped through the memorial book together. We talked about the previous events together. She hung her right arm, although she frowned in pain when she moved, but her eyes were crooked, like a cute little fox. When the love was strong, I couldn't help but turn my head and kiss her, and she protested, "I'm a wounded. Do you have humanity?" Later, I put off my internship and everything else to take care of her at home wholeheartedly. In the warm yellow light, every time I finished frying a dish, I turned around and saw her sitting in the dining room, tilting her head to look at me. "Alan Joan," she laughed, "always beautiful. I kind of want to marry you sooner." Just a little bit like that. I walked over and gently pinched the tip of her nose. "What do you want? In this life, you can only marry me." Countless times I woke up in the middle of the night. How I wished I could stay in my dreams forever, and even have a time machine that would allow me to go back to the day when my second year of graduate school began. I'm willing to pay any price. This time, I will refuse Amelia's pathetic pleas, and I will keep my distance from her, instead of taking chances, while enjoying Joe Wallace's trust and love for me. While playing an ambiguous game with my sister, I was indeed wrong, and I couldn't have been more wrong. But dreams are just dreams after all, and time will not be turned back. Joe Wallace left. I tried everything, and she didn't look back. On the seashore where we had hugged and kissed together, she left me and walked away without looking back. But she was so good that at the end of the breakup, she still gave me a gentle hug. She said, "Alan Joan, goodbye. These 7 years, thank you." At that moment, I really understood how much I loved her, how reluctant I was, but I really lost her. The booklet that Joe Wallace made, I found in the closet after she left. The day she was injured was supposed to be our 7th anniversary, and this booklet was a surprise she gave me. Turning the first page, there is a line of beautiful letters. "May I be with Alan Joan for a long time?" I burst into tears. The girl I loved the most, the girl who used to love me the most, was finally lost by me. Extra to Joe Wallace. In the second year of working in Beijing, I met my husband. He was on the same floor as me, and was the team leader in the department next door. That night, my divorce boss came over to ask me for dinner again, and I organized a polite verbal refusal, but he didn't seem to want to give up this time. At this moment, he suddenly appeared, smiled and put his arm around my shoulder, and said to his boss, "Boss, it's 7:30, and I'm letting my girlfriend work overtime." The boss was stunned for a long time, and fled in the eyes of everyone. He sent me off the elevator and out of the company, and before I could say thank you, he apologized first. "I'm sorry for that situation, because I was embarrassed to see you, and I didn't think much about it," he said embarrassedly. "Now that I think about it, it doesn't seem good." I smiled. "I don't care. It's better this way. He won't look for me in the future." "It's you." Many colleagues who worked overtime just now should have heard it, but I'm afraid tomorrow the whole floor will be spread. Although I didn't know him before, I also knew that he was handsome, sunny and capable, and he still had a lot of fans in this building. "I don't mind." He smiled. Thank you." I thanked me and prepared to go. "Wait a minute." He stopped me suddenly, a little embarrassed, and said, "Well, since we don't mind, do you want to?" I looked at him dumbfounded. He took a deep breath. "Do you want to fake it? Give it a try." Later, we were together. Neither of us is a Beijing native, but after spending time with him, the two of us spent the weekend together on the streets of Beijing. We drove to the grassland to camp and see the stars, went to Xiangshan to see the red leaves, and went to Chongli to skiing through the snow together. We also go to the beach to watch the fireworks display, go to the mountains to soak in the hot springs, and doze off and fish by the lake. He would go to the store at Disneyland, buy me the furry hairpin I wanted, and proudly say that my girlfriend is the most beautiful princess here today. I will also take a roller coaster ride at Universal Studios, holding the timid hand tightly and saying, "Don't worry, I will never let go of you." When we cook together, he will make me my favorite fried tofu, and I will cook him porridge, and tell him to take care of his stomach. I was sick and had a fever, and he didn't sleep all night, afraid that the ear thermometer would wake me up, so he gently tested my temperature with his forehead, and proudly said that he was more accurate than the ear thermometer. That year, when the Leonid meteor shower came, I had a lot of fun and dragged him out to see it in the middle of the night, but I waited for an hour before I saw a meteor. Suddenly, like a child, he shouted at the sky, "I want to be with Joe Wallace forever." The eyes of passers-by were all focused on us, and I panicked and pulled him up and ran, and the two of them laughed as they ran, until they ran to a quiet alley. I said, "What are you doing? Disturb the people in the middle of the night. Be careful that people come out and beat you." He said, "No way. Didn't you say that it was the most spiritual to make a wish on a meteor? It's hard to get one. Don't you have to seize the opportunity?" We all laughed. He loved me so much. I loved him so much. And a year and a half later, we got married. My parents-in-law are very open-minded people. They did not dislike my family situation, but treated me like a daughter, and cared for me everywhere. It didn't take long for me to get pregnant, and 9 months later, I gave birth to my daughter. When my daughter was 3 years old, the house in my hometown was about to be demolished because of the construction of the railway, so I took my husband and daughter back. The things in the old house were all moved from the dormitory after I graduated, and my daughter was greedy for play, pushing all kinds of cardboard boxes to play, but one of the boxes fell over, and all the letters inside spilled out. The gentleman walked over and cleaned up, jokingly, "Whoa, wife. You used to be so popular." He knew about my previous relationship, so I smiled and asked him, "Are you jealous?" He shook his head and looked at me with sparkling eyes as he resealed the letter into the box. "Why am I jealous? Isn't it that this person who wrote the letter is jealous and envies me?" He walked over, hugged me, and smiled. "After all, I was the one who married you in the end." Later, we sent the contents of the house to an old house in my husband's hometown for storage, including the box of letters. Everything was in order, and my daughter was clamoring to see her mother's school, so I took my husband and daughter to my high school alma mater, but unfortunately now I am no longer allowed to enter and exit casually. My husband went to the convenience store in front to buy water, and I accompanied my daughter, walking slowly while counting the Maple Leaf Chinese restaurant, falling on the side of the street. She counted and counted, then suddenly stopped and looked across the road. "Mom, that uncle seems to be looking at you." I turned my head and was stunned. Looking at each other, he seemed to hesitate, but still walked over. "Long time no see," he said to me. "Long time no see." I nodded. "Your daughter." He smiled. It's cute. It looks like you." "Uncle," the girl said, "you know my mother. Do you have a daughter?" He was slightly stunned, and squatted down with a smile. "No, my uncle is not married yet, so he doesn't have a daughter yet." "Well, then you're not as good as my father. My father has a daughter." He was silent and smiled. "Yes, Uncle envy your father." I walked over and grabbed my daughter. He stood up, was silent, and said, also, something, that, "Let's go first." I nodded. "Okay, goodbye." With that, he turned around and walked back across the street, while I took my daughter and walked on. The leaves of the trees fell one by one, and the ground was full of gold. After walking a few steps, I ran into my husband buying water and came back. The daughter rushed into her father's arms, and the husband picked her up with one hand and took out the pomelo tea from his arms with the other. I was stunned. "Why are you still in your arms? Didn't you give the bag?" He smiled. "No. The insulated cabinet of the convenience bag is broken. I'm afraid it's too cold, so I'll put it in my arms to warm you up and drink it. After all, it's autumn. I'm going to drink this too. My daughter pointed to the pomelo tea in my hand. That's not going to work. The gentleman deliberately teased her. It's status warmth for mommy, and you can only drink the water from your own jug. I smiled and took his arm. Well, this pomelo tea is still quite sweet. In the evening, sitting on the high-speed train back to Beijing, I looked at the receding scenery outside the window, and suddenly thought that this might be the last time I would go back to my hometown. What are you thinking, sir? Asked me. I looked at my sleeping daughter in my arms and smiled, and leaned on his shoulder. I wonder if when I am 70 or 80, will our grandchildren, like my daughter today, dig out the dusty letters that have been sealed for a long time, and pester me to tell them the stories of my youth. Then I can say to them, whether I met your grandfather or not, I will never regret that decision. The girl in the letter, in the days of her youth, she loved passionately, trusted unreservedly, and resolutely left. She has no regrets in her youth, and has never regretted it. I would like to use this article to commemorate the youth we loved. This story has ended. Everyone is welcome to subscribe to the channel to get the latest content at any time, and a large number of novels are updated daily.